In business today, three things to know. First, Cantor jettisoned as big business looked to defeat Tea Party candidates, one just threw the Republican Party into chaos by tossing out the House Majority Leader. Then, the deluge by Uber. Thousands of taxi drivers strike fearing the on-demand limo service may run them off the road. And how the UK became a tax haven for American companies and what the U.S. needs to do to bring them back. Xchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Boy, what a difference a day makes. Virginia delivered a political earthquake to the Republican Party. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor suffered a historic and virtually unprecedented loss in a primary election to a Tea Party upstart. Economics professor David Brott handedly beat Cantor despite being wildly outspent. Take a look at these numbers. Cantor raised $5.4 million. Brott won the race with just $200,000 in the bank. In fact, Cantor spent more on steak than Brott did during the election. The defeat of the House Majority Leader has shaken the GOP as well as big business, which has been pouring money, as you know, into reelecting incumbent Republicans and defeating Tea Party candidates because they fear they cannot win. Did Cantor lose over immigration reform, or was he somehow not conservative enough, or did he lose because he simply lost touch with his district? In a moment, we'll speak with Heather Higgins from Independent Women's Voice about what a Tea Party victory means for business. But first, we turn to our Washington Bureau Chief James Blue with reaction on Capitol Hill. Good afternoon to you, James. So how are Republicans and Democrats feeling about this loss today?
Well, you know, people are really shocked. There was an acknowledgement that Cantor had a contestant and had a contested seat, but there was no sense that he was in any trouble. You know, the polls that were sort of looked at last week showed Cantor ahead by wide margins. So this is a real sort of shock to the political establishment. Well,
you know, whether you support Brott or not, it's sort of refreshing when an incumbent congressperson loses, isn't it? It just doesn't happen that much.
You know, I think, I don't think...
Maybe not refreshing for John Boehner.
I don't think Eric Cantor feels particularly refreshed. I mean, it does sort of say and really prove that nothing's a given and that voters will and can decide the political direction of this country. And in the 2nd District of Virginia, there will be a new congressman next year. Likely well, we know for sure it will be a professor at Randolph-Macon College, because both the Republican and Democrat are professors at a small college in Virginia.
Yeah, they could have some debates in the hallway there, I imagine. You know, is the GOP in danger of maybe reading too much into this? Meaning, was this based on national policies, or did Eric Cantor lose because people said he just wasn't even in the district that much during this race?
I think Eric Cantor lost largely because he had become a fixture of Washington and was not as attentive to the needs of the district as his opponent. You know, the real challenge for Republicans, there's a runoff race in the Mississippi Senate election that'll happen next month, where you have another long-term senator. I think he's been here 7 terms, and his challenger, who's saying that the Senator Thad Cochran is a fixture of Washington and needs to go. So those folks who have come to Washington, who've done well, who've joined the leadership, they're in trouble. The Tea Party candidate in Kansas has just sort of said, Pat Roberts, the senator out there, you are going to be put on notice and taken out on the 3rd of August.
And this is a little bit of a reversal because some earlier primaries, the Tea Party candidates did not do so well, and now they seem to be picking up. James Blue in Washington, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here in New York is Heather Higgins from the Independent Women's Voice. We have members of your organization on frequently. Good to see you here in New York. Thank you for coming on Arisexchange. So first, your take of what exactly happened here.
Well, there's a little reported thing that's incredibly, I think, salient. Eric Cantor had not signed the repeal pledge, and his opponent had.
This is for Obamacare.
Obamacare.
But he introduced more than 40 bills to repeal.
Yes, but they were all bills that didn't go anywhere. And if you look at the scripts of the Tea Party groups that were going door to door in his district, big on that was the fact that he hadn't signed the repeal pledge, and it was also the fact that he had not brought to the House floor the vote on whether or not you could undo the special exemption from Obamacare that Congress is happily living with itself. And that caused a great amount of ire. And then the issue that emphasized, of course, was the never bringing down the amount of debt that the government was incurring.
Do you think the race then was decided on the national issues and not from a local one?
I think in large measure because also if you look at the Cochran upset, he too had not signed the repeal pledge, and he too is a happy beneficiary of the congressional exemption. And his opponent signed the repeal pledge and made a big deal about this, and it will be a big issue going into their runoff.
Is this, however, a loss for big business? The Chamber of Commerce, is pushing immigration reform, and while Cantor wasn't exactly pushing immigration reform, he seemed to be open to the idea. He was also, arguing for better tax treatment on, for example, into private equity investments. Does that go away here? Did big business lose here?
No, I don't think so, because if you look at Brott, he's an economics professor. If anything, he might be even more serious about those things which are essential to a well-functioning business economy, which is having dependability and the capacity to project and not having an administration that constantly changes the terms of the legislation that gets passed.
But the argument against the Tea Party is they can't get anything done, though, because they are not willing to engage even members of their own party in some cases.
I don't know that that's correct. I think that they would be happy to see an awful lot of stuff get done. I think they're reluctant. The way I read, for example, the immigration issue right now is this is not the same as the immigration debate was. There are a lot of people who recognize the need for greater number of visas and recognize that there's a problem that needs to be dealt with here, in addition to the border security question. And this is all a part of a strong growth argument. But they are very reluctant to let this administration be handed any kind of deal and then watch them selectively enforce only pieces of it. So I think that's, Well, the president has gone out of his way with executive orders. Right.
They clearly, more so than maybe the President Bush did. The concern is that the Tea Party candidates cannot be elected, though. Do the Democrat in this race have a chance of winning now?
The district is not such that I think that you can think that that's likely, but you can never rule anything out. You've got two effectively untested, really, candidates here. There are going to be mistakes made. Who knows how it will play? But yes, it is a Republican-leaning district. I think business would be smart to back the Tea Party guy, although I don't think he describes himself as a Tea Party guy. It's just that he had Tea Party support. But even there, not heavily. They looked at the fact that never in history has a sitting House leader been overturned in a primary. It just doesn't happen.
And I think the first time he's lost an election was 1899.
Well, that's when the position was created. So it's never happened before.
Heather Higgins, thank you so much.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
you coming on. Turning now to the markets, a sell-off on the street, some would say somewhat overdue after a series of run-ups. Let's take a look at the final numbers. Dow Jones Industrial Average finishing off its lows, down 101.27 to 16,844. The S&P 500 off by about 7, and the Nasdaq pulling back by 6. Taking a look at some of the stocks we're watching today. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says it has stopped fining General Motors $7,000 a day for unanswered questions over faulty ignition switches. General Motors closing down 28 cents to 36.12. Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba launches its first U.S. consumer online site, 11main.com. Before its much-anticipated IPO. The invitation-only site will offer a wide range of products, from jewelry and clothing to home and outdoor goods. Yahoo owns a significant stake in Alibaba, around 20%. Yahoo closing up 32 cents. And Lululemon voted for the re-election of chairman of the board on Wednesday, despite the founder and largest shareholder voting against him and claiming the board is, quote, not aligned with the rest of the company. Lululemon down $1.18 to 44.30. I think Lululemon's only concerned with their yoga people being aligned with yoga. Taking a look at the commodities, gold closing up 80 cents and oil creeping up a dime to 104.45. Tony Dwyer, U.S. portfolio strategist from Canaccord Genuity, thinks the market is in for a correction that we're only just beginning the sell-off. Tony, welcome to Arisexchange again.
It's great to be back, Andrew.
So you are thinking that we're sort of in store for a little bit of a sell-off here.
What we try and do is take my opinion out of it, and nobody really cares what you think. They care what the data looks like, and all the historical data suggests that the market is due for somewhere between a 5 and 10% correction. And given the length of time that it's been in such a strong uptrend, I would probably think it's going to be closer to the 10% than the 5%.
And this is a danger area for retail investors, isn't it? As the market keeps moving up, they sort of get pulled by the gravitation pull into it.
It depends.
And then could get no.
If you're looking out the next 2 years,
Yep.
by the next tick, it won't matter. Honestly, I think we're going to have a correction, but that same history and the precedent that suggests you're going to get a 5 to 10% correction is saying on the other side of that trade is somewhere between a 20 and 25% gain, even into the end of the year. So if the valuations are expanding, the fundamental backdrop is terrific. The Fed is easy. You know, there's not really a lot of economic news that's coming
Why do you
out.
say the fundamentals are particularly good right now?
The fundamentals not meaning strong. I think the viewers have to separate economy from stock market.
There's no question about that.
The fundamental side of the economy
Yes.
is not great.
Yep.
That's great for stocks because it keeps inflation low, it keeps the Fed easy,
and
it
easy
keeps
policy.
a steep yield curve, available more money is available to borrow, and that keeps the economy and earnings on a positive track. And that ultimately is what drives earnings. It's not the rate of change of earnings. You don't need strong earnings. You just need positive earnings.
Let me ask you about the economic environment a little bit. There was a report out that the Fed may be a little bit aggressive in its GDP forecast because we had such a lousy first quarter. Does the market look at that as well? Is the market thinking the Fed is on target, or does the market think that the Fed is being a little bit too optimistic?
Honestly, I can't imagine that a portfolio manager managing other people's money is sitting there watching the news saying, okay, the Fed thinks. If the Fed thinks is always right, there would never be a change in interest rate policy.
Okay.
So really it's based on the availability of bank lending. But again, the Fed is probably going to be a little bit aggressive, and that's why all of a sudden you're starting to see this backtrack. We're not going to, when we do start raising rates, it's going to be at a much slower pace than historically has been the case. Ultimately, there's only one indicator that really tells you when a recession is coming, and that's when the short-term interest rates are above the long-term interest rates, which is an inverted yield curve. We are so far from that.
And
We're
we did have
years
that.
from that.
We did have that in about 2007, 2008, am I right?
We have it every time before a recession. Like, I can give you the timing of a recession at the minimum. You have 1 year before the Fed's
That's an amazing statement because it is a clear indicator that you can look at.
It's very clear. You've never had a recession without an inversion of the yield curve post-World War II. That's a factual statement. So, as a result of that, you don't have to sell anything until well after an inversion of the curve. A typical inversion of the curve lasts for 15 months. So even after the yield curve inverts, you can wait up to 15 months before you really have to worry about a recession.
From a stock market perspective, did anything that happened in this primary yesterday change people's opinion about the political environment and what it might mean? For example, big business worried about another government shutdown.
It's too mixed. It's too early. I think it's fantastic for the political commentators. I think the bull.
We've
The
had a
bull
lot to
market
talk about
starts with the
today.
political commentators. The reality is the fundamental backdrop of the economy remains the same. The Fed remains the same. They don't really care whether Eric Cantor lost or not.
Okay. Tony Dwyer, thank you as always.
Thank you, Andrew.
Coming up, Uber anxiety. Will taxi cab drivers stop the free market from letting you decide which car service to use? You're watching Arisexchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
It was a day of traffic chaos in major cities across Europe as taxi drivers mounted one of the biggest protests against Uber, a U.S. car service that allows people to summon rides at the touch of a button. Taxi drivers claim companies like Uber are breaking local taxi rules across the European Union and threatening their livelihoods. It's the same argument that they've been making here in the United States as well. Joining us on the phone from Oregon to tell us more about Uber is Alan Taylor, automotive expert and CEO of Entertainment Radio Network. Good afternoon, Alan. This is a protest. Really, is it about taxes and licenses, or is it really about livelihood and that competition is knocking on the door?
Well, the world is changing, and entrepreneurs are having to think of new ways to make money. And guess what? Uber was originally called Uber Cab. Now, that went away, obviously, because all the cab drivers were probably saying, hey, that's not right. We have to pay different, licenses and get different kinds of fees and things for our business. I get it that they're mad. They should be mad because guess what? the world is about to change, and cab drivers are going to be doing something else, I have a feeling.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is about a free market, because in every city that Uber goes into, you get these protests. In almost every city here, at least in the U.S., it appears that political leaders have been rejecting those arguments because people really like the convenience of what's going on here. This is really a disruptive technology.
You want to hear something interesting? The median income of an Uber driver is now between $75,000 and $90,000 bucks. These guys are making money. And all you need to do is have a car that's newer than 2005, have insurance, and get a criminal background check. And I have a feeling that's more than a lot of these guys that are driving cabs have.
And they probably have to know their way around some cities, and there's some questions as to whether cab drivers all know about that. $18 billion valuation for Uber, that worth it?
You know, that to me is the odd point, but I have a feeling that, you know, being that everybody that's in business has driven in a cab and been uncomfortable in a cab, and probably if they've tried Uber, they went, wow, this is kind of nice. I think they see this as a big wave of something new for
and for those unfamiliar with how it works, you have an app, you punch a few buttons, you get a text from the nearest car out there. Within about 15 minutes, somebody shows up, they give you the name. You don't even have to have cash with you. It's fully automated. You know, this is basically the same as picking up the phone and calling a car service. So I am not sure where the legal argument comes in for these taxi drivers.
Well, here's another one. They have something called UberX, which is your standard, you know, ride-sharing, carpooling driver. Then they have Uber Black, which is really more like a professional car service. So there are two different types, and then you can have your credit card on file, like you said. But interestingly, you know, they've got some big partners: AT&T, United Airlines, American Express. And again, this is kind of a form of ride-sharing, and Colorado just signed into law its first ride-sharing legislation in the country, and now California is calling Uber a transportation network company. So the cab drivers really haven't got much to say when the states and the countries around the world are all embracing it.
And I think I misspoke. I said 18,000. Of course, the valuation has been pegged at about $18 billion. When you talk about the free market, is maybe the way to level the playing field then to change some of the archaic rules that taxi cab drivers have? For example, in New York City, you know, they're not allowed. You can't pick up the phone and call them. You have to wave them down on the street. Maybe the answer is letting them play in the same territory as well.
Right. Well, and Uber has offered, and especially what's going on over there in Madrid, Berlin, Paris, London, they've offered to let them, you know, be a part of Uber. You only pay a 20% commission on the fare. It seems to me like the taxi drivers are going to finally scratch their head and go, you know what, I'm going to get my own car and be part of Uber.
And boy, haven't these protests backfired? Because, you know, that's really good to anger your constituency, your customers, by causing massive traffic jams.
Yeah, I know. It makes no sense. And by the way, Uber helps you out with your insurance as long as you're logged into the network and something happens. You know, they're really playing this smart. And guess what? The rules have just changed.
What kind of regulations, though, might be forced on them? Because they have had some mishaps here with some of their drivers.
You know what? I mean, obviously, the lawyers are going to get involved, and they're going to have more stringent regulation on the drivers, more so than just having a driver's license and insurance and a background check. I think it'll just continue to play out as, you know, and we'll watch it play out. Who knows? At some point, it may become obsolete because the rules and regulations will become so strict, and we'll be back in those stinky taxi cabs. But for now, it's cool.
Yeah, and ultimately, when new technologies take off, eventually the world comes around to accepting them with some changes. And we saw that, for example, with Napster. Alan Taylor, thank you so much, CEO of Entertainment Radio Network. Always enjoyable. Time now for our business ticker, stories making news around the world. The European Union has launched an investigation into improper tax deals that Apple, Starbucks, and Fiat may have struck with some EU countries. The probe focuses on whether Ireland, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg have given these major American firms unfair tax breaks. The EU's investigation is part of a wider push to keep multinationals from taking advantage of loopholes as corporate tax avoidance continues to gain attention. On the eve of the World Cup in Brazil, there are calls for FIFA's president to call it quits. The UEFA, that is Europe's governing body for soccer, urged Sepp Blatter, the president of FIFA, which is the world governing body of the sport, not to seek re-election in 2015. Blatter is being denounced for saying accusations of corruption in the picking of Qatar for the 2022 World Cup are based in racism and not because the country allegedly bribed voting members. The restaurant chain P.F. Chang may be the latest victim of a data breach. The Scottsdale-based company is investigating a potential security breach involving credit and debit card information reportedly stolen from its restaurants in several states. P.F. Chang, which operates 211 Asian-themed locations in the U.S., said it is working with authorities to learn more. In the past several months, a number of other retailers have also suffered data breaches, including Target and Neiman Marcus. Celebrity cook Paula Deen is planning a comeback, a digital comeback. The disgraced former cooking show host, who admitted using racial slurs, is launching her own online network called what else but the Paula Deen Network. It will feature daily programming with new cooking and lifestyle episodes. The subscription-based network will launch in September and will be accessible by computer, smartphone, or tablet. Ahead, a 90-year-old who really broke bad, our favorite person of the day, next here on Arisexchange.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is the florist who prosecutors say ran the largest cocaine operation in Detroit's history. And here he is, Grandpa Cocaine himself, 90-year-old Leo Sharp, a World War II veteran and an expert on lily plants, is accused of being one of the nation's top importers of coke. While caring for his garden, he allegedly delivered thousands of pounds of cocaine for a Mexican cartel. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency says Sharp attended flower conventions across the country and gave away hundreds of flowers he grew. But the DEA says that during this time, he was also shepherding thousands of pounds of blow. In 2010, he is said to have made at least $1 million in his side job. He has been sentenced to 3 years in jail. The government is letting him keep his lily. Leo Sharp, a florist version of the aging Don Corleone, is our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, how the UK became a tax haven and why our companies are fleeing America. Taxes. You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Songhai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
The Bahamas, Switzerland, and Malaysia, not just good places to visit, they are among the top tax havens in the world. There's a map of the others. Places where companies are setting up shop to get the benefits of tax breaks. But now you can add the United Kingdom to this list. That's because the British government says recent changes to UK tax rules are geared toward supporting genuine business investment. Joining us now is David Selig. He's federal tax practitioner at his own firm, Selig & Associates. Welcome to Arisexchange.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, we've always known Switzerland as a tax haven, the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg. I was in Monte Carlo, which has more money in the bank than it has people in the country, of course. I didn't think the UK, however, would be considered a tax haven, considering it's part of Europe where you usually think the tax laws are unfavorable.
Well, that's only by comparison to what's going on in the United States.
Yeah.
If you look at the UK, I think next year the corporate tax rate will be about 20%. Here, it's almost 40%. So that is a heady inducement.
And it's 40%, and big businesses, here's the problem. Big businesses aren't paying it because they can afford to go elsewhere. It is the smaller businesses that are stuck here paying this 40%.
Right, and there's actually a lot more to it that makes it so attractive to big business. You know, under our system of law, you have to pay tax on your worldwide income. Additionally, if a large corporation wants to bring a lot of money back into the United States,
repatriating,
they're penalized for it. And the long and short of it is that money never finds itself back into our economy. So it is a deleterious policy that we really have to adjust and look at. Unfortunately, the administration, even the past administration, has been antagonistic
it's not
to
just
business.
it's not just a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. The politicians here are just reluctant to do so, and I think part of the reason is because of the public perception that you're giving tax breaks to large corporations. There's got to be a change in message that this might result in better jobs, or at least result in them bringing back the money here so they actually pay more taxes in the United States.
Precisely. You know, when you bring the business back, it opens up the door for so many opportunities. And unfortunately, the perception does not accord with the truth. It is very popular to think that these big companies are getting away with something. In reality, they pay an awful lot of monies. They should be paying it here in the United States.
Well, let's look at Apple. It has some $150 billion in the bank, but the vast majority of that is offshore, off the United States shores, and that is because of the tax policy.
That's exactly right, and it's perfectly legal, and I would remind your viewing audience, tax avoidance is legal. Tax evasion is illegal. Right. Unfortunately, the government now is starting to assert this economic substance doctrine, where they're saying if you made a decision solely to avoid taxes, we can unwind that and hit you with this onerous penalty.
And that's ridiculous because they are playing by the rules, even if we don't particularly like the rules. Okay, so let's look at our tax policy here. Walk me through it. Because there's double taxation for corporations. Talk about what that means.
Okay. If you have a regular C corporation, the corporation is taxed.
And that is publicly traded companies, all are C corporations, as well as large private corporations.
However, you know, you still are able to deduct from that your expenses, ordinary and necessary business expenses, employee benefits and such. So there are real advantages to that. If you're a smaller corporation, an S corporation, it's a pass-through. You don't have to double.
There's only one level of taxation.
So if you're paying money on the corporate tax and then you're distributing the money to yourself, you're paying your personal income tax, you know, we're paying a lot of taxes.
Where would you like to see the federal tax rate? And we're not even talking about state taxes on corporations. Where would you like to see the federal tax rate be? And does that come with maybe closing some loopholes?
Okay. I would like to see it nearly abolished. I think it should be
zero
very
tax
low.
rate.
Right,
really?
Very, very low. And I would like to say there are very few loopholes. The perception of loopholes is a lot greater than the existence of them. You know, unfortunately, our tax law is this expanding pandect that is very difficult.
Is that good for you as a tax professional?
You would think so, but the problem is there is a lack of consistency. So you can have two issues and come back with two entirely different results from the same office within the IRS. So we really need clarity. Now, I want to be very clear. We don't necessarily need oversimplification. A lot of people say we need to make it much easier. So I understand it. Not necessarily. It would be if
it needs to be fairer. It needs to be fairer, and it needs to make us competitive, doesn't it?
Yes, certainly competitive, and we certainly need to have an interest in our businesses so we don't drive them out of business.
David Selig with Selig & Associates. Come back soon.
Hey, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Tomorrow on Arisexchange, the global economic fallout over the Boko Haram's reign of terror that's been going on in Nigeria. Let's take a look at the final numbers. Wall Street pulling back on the day, red across the board. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arisexchange.